Hi, I'm Roberta Bonder. Welcome to the Earth Summit and the last one. The Earth Summit is not only about countries or governments' environmental policies, it is about you and your individual responsibility. Examine the way you live your life and how you can make a difference by creating an atmosphere of education, awareness, and assistance in your own neighborhoods. Each of you is a seed that, when combined, will form a forest of planetary and environmental consciousness. The choice to take responsibility is up to you. The Earth is a being with a vision to evolve and ready to emerge. Honor her in silence and prepare yourself to make a world of difference on her behalf.
The old man hunched forward, his head slightly bent to one side. He wondered where he was. Maybe this was all a dream. Maybe he was, in fact, dead. For years he had lived alone in a dark cave near an ancient swamp. And now? He looked about the great hall. Although the hall was lit only by candlelight, there were no shadows. Everything seemed filled with its own translucent light. The old man narrowed his eyes and studied the people about him. They too seemed to glow with some inner light. One of them smiled at him. He frowned back and scratched his beard. For some reason he couldn't understand, he was the guest of honor. They told him that he was the last one, whatever that meant. For he had refused to talk to any of them, afraid that if he did, they might find out what he had done far back in that other time. Suddenly a great hush fell over the hall, and in through the marble archway walked a white-haired woman in long, flowing white robes. Slowly she took her place at the far end of the hall on a great throne-like chair, similar to the one at the other end of the hall in which the old man was seated.
To all of you, welcome.
The voice of the white-haired lady rang like crystal throughout the hall. Then she looked towards the old man.
Long have we searched for you, and now at last you are found. You are most welcome.
The old man stared back at her. She was old beyond imagining, and yet, in the soft candlelight, she looked young and beautiful beyond belief. He could not remember ever having seen her before, and yet she awoke deep within him long-forgotten memories of that other time.
This is a day of celebration, and as our custom, we begin our celebration with the story of that other time. Far back in that other time, humankind was like a butterfly about to emerge from its dark cocoon. But it was a timid butterfly, afraid to leave the comfort of what it knew. Back in that other time, humankind had everything they needed to go forward, yet they clung to their old ways. In fear, they held to their old beliefs. It's hard for you who live in love to imagine the iron grip of fear, but humankind lived in fear. And it was this that held them back. Humankind could no longer love because fear filled their hearts. And so that this might be taken from the hearts of men, they were taken into that which they feared the most, world's end. World's end did not come from war, as everyone had expected. It came about in a way that put an end to war altogether. Now in that time, the oceans began to die, poisoned by men's fear.
The old man leaned forward and began muttering to himself.
I know that other time. It was my time, and it hadn't been fear that killed the oceans. I was there when the oceans were dying.
And he wanted to shout at them. He remembered when scientists discovered that it was industrial waste draining into the oceans that was killing everything in them. even the almost invisible plankton?
I was there when they discovered something that had stunned the world.
The fact that most of our oxygen came not from trees, but from these insignificant sea creatures called plankton, and that once they died, except for a few animals that live deep in the forests, everything that breathed oxygen would die as well.
I was there when the scientists predicted we had only 2 more years to live.
The old man wanted to stand up and cry out what he knew, but he didn't. He was afraid to. He was afraid they'd discover what he had done in that other time. And the white-haired lady continued her story.
But it was fear that brought the nations of the world together. In that time, in that other time, nothing else but fear could have united the world. For what was the point of fighting if in 2 years they'd all be dead? So the nations of the world met together, and after many days and nights of talking and arguing, they selected 4 leaders to coordinate the task of saving the oceans. First, the 4 leaders brought together experts from every country to work together on the problem. Then they ordered that food be shipped to wherever people were hungry. No one needed to feel the fear of hunger. But the most important thing the 4 did was to see that everyone on Earth knew what was happening. This was the first step in breaking the fear that gripped the world, that everyone knows the truth. They did this with a device that allowed people to see and hear each other over great distances.
That was the television set. Every family on Earth had been issued one, and each day at the appointed hour, they'd watch to see if an antidote for the dying oceans had been discovered.
And finally, with only 14 months left, the leaders announced that a chemical had been found that could perhaps neutralize the poison. The old man remembered it well. Day and night they had worked to make enough of the chemical to spread across the oceans. Everyone had worked hard, and yet they had seemed to enjoy it. And during that time, even strangers would stop and talk to one another. Then had come the fateful day when thousands upon thousands of ships loaded with the chemical headed out to sea. After that, there were weeks of waiting to see if it had worked. The old man had turned 22 on the day that the results were announced. The oceans had not been neutralized. They had failed. 22 years old, his life just beginning, and now it was over. And the old man clenched his fist at the memory of that other time and looked at the lady in white as if it was her fault. But she continued with her story.
The nations of the world failed to save the oceans, but it wasn't really a failure. It only seemed that way. You see, the nations of the world had stopped fighting. War had come to an end. That was the real success.
They had all been faced with death, and he listened to her in disbelief as she went on.
The people of the world were shocked and angry. They had tried so hard, and they were still under the illusion that they'd failed. The truth was that for the first time in the history of the world, the peoples of the earth had worked together with one purpose. They now trusted one another. They were ready for the next step.
The old man looked at her darkly. He remembered when the 4 leaders had announced that the Earth had only 5 months of oxygen left. They had talked about the possibility of something unexpected happening, maybe even that human beings might evolve beyond the need for oxygen, but that had been utter absolute nonsense. He glared at the lady in white as if daring her to tell him differently. She smiled towards him, and for some reason he suddenly remembered that one of the leaders had been a woman who had won world acclaim for her cure for cancer, a white-haired lady whom one reporter had dubbed the fairy godmother of the world. And ever after that, she had been known affectionately as simply the godmother. Being the senior member, she had been the last of the 4 to speak. The words she had once spoken came into his head.
There is a way out. We change.
There's a way out. We can change.
I know most of you believe it is impossible to really change, to become something different than you are, but it is not. However, first, we have to let go of our old beliefs. We must accept the fact that each of us is responsible for what has happened. We cannot blame one another.
But the old man didn't want to even think about what he had done, and he let his mind drift away onto other things. But the lady in white drew him back with her words.
Those last few months were the most important time in man's history. People began to understand that it was their own fear that was polluting the world, killing the oceans. Even the righteous began to see that they too acted out of fear rather than love. However, even in their darkest moment, humankind was capable of a magnificent gesture. People from all over the world began sending messages to the Godmother. Find some way of saving the children. Our children are young and unafraid. They're not tied to old ways, and for them nothing is impossible. Perhaps they can change. Perhaps deep in the forest there's enough oxygen for them to live, at least long enough to try. We'll find some way of saving the children. Here was a worldwide sense of caring beyond self and family. It was the sign that the butterfly was getting ready to leave the cocoon.
The lady in white stopped and studied the old man for a long time. He looked frantic, as if he wanted to run from the hall. And she knew that she had to reach him now, or he'd be lost forever. She knew that she'd have to risk bringing him into her story.
And so, the children were sent into the forest, wherever large and ancient trees could still be found, for that was where there might be enough oxygen for them to live. And with each group of children was sent a strong young man or woman, young persons who were loving, fearless, chosen, because they'd promised to protect the children.
And inside the old man's head, the words were pounding.
Stop it. Stop.
And with us tonight is one of these men who long ago was sent out to protect the children. He is our guest of honor.
Everyone turned and looked towards the old man. The words were exploding inside his head.
It's a lie!
He knew now he would have to tell them what he had done.
Yes, I was one of those men who went to protect the children. But I wasn't fearless or loving. I went because I was afraid. I didn't care about the children. I just didn't want to die. Can you understand that? And I wasn't chosen. I begged. I begged them, let me go. And it came that strange day in the forest. Everything filled with a blinding light. It was so powerful. It had to have been a light blast from some horrendous holocaust. And I ran. Yes, I left the children. I ran. I hid in a cave. I lived in that cave ever since. And I don't know what happened to the children.
Suddenly, he had a strange thought. These people looking at him, they were those children grown to maturity, and they had come back to judge him.
Yes. I left you to perish in that blinding light. All I thought about was myself. I was terrified with my own fear. That's why I did it. Oh, I wish it could have been different.
He sank back into his chair and stared blankly at the floor, while tears of shame, guilt, and then relief ran down his face. He had never told anyone before. The lady in white waited until the old man raised his eyes, and then she asked,
Would you like to know what happened when you ran back into that cave?
Yes, please.
Would Would you like to know how my story ends?
Yes, I would.
Well, after the children went into the forest, those of us who remained behind had no choice but to accept our fate. As we did so, our fear disappeared. We were no longer afraid, even of the world's end. A great peace swept across the earth. Then the last day arrived. Everyone gathered at the appointed hour in front of their sets, and the face of her, whom they called the godmother, appeared to each of them. And here is what she said. Your work is all but done. You have changed war into peace and transformed fear into trust. To each of you I say, well done. The next step is so simple, your minds will deny it. You have but to join together, speak with one voice, and open yourselves to the power within you. For you now stand ready to know the full truth of your being. You now can be trusted with the power of the universe that has been locked within your heart since time began. You are now ready for a happier world. Come, let us cross over together. Let us open our hearts to each other and speak with one voice. And these were the words that were spoken by every person on earth. We, the people of Earth, of one mind and heart,